Hi there, it's Polly here. Drinking tea, salute. Because my endocrinologist said do not drink alcohol no more. Mr. Suits and I are happy. So we dug out something I've wanted to review for a while. Here it is. This is the first set of Wargames rules I ever bought for myself as a little wee kitty wink. This is Chainmail, which is this one. So this is 3rd edition, 1975. Yep, that'd be right. 12-year-old me at the Games Club. Now, this one's kind of relevant at the moment. There's a little dedication to this, and it does say, with thanks to all the medieval and fantasy enthusiasts who offered helpful suggestions, special thanks to Alan Lucian and of course Ernie the Barbarian. Well, Ernie the Barbarian is of course Ernie Gygax, because as you can see these rules are by Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin. Sadly, Ernie has died recently, so I thought it would be nice to look at something that he had a hand in those early days. Chainmail is the root of Dungeons and Dragons. So, long ago in the mysterious depths of time, Gygax and Co. were in a Wargames club. Wargames clubs at this period largely made their own house rules for things. It was very uncommon to have internationally published rule sets. WIG was putting out some sets for ancients, and there were things like, FX books on Napoleonic wargaming, and so there were starting to be some general publications. And TSR started up and decided to put out rules that they had been refining, which were their club's medieval battle game rules. So these are designed for medieval battles. The period is kind of vague. We have Crusaders versus Saracens. I hate that term, Saracens, but Saracens battling it out on the cover. So obviously designed for 13th century or late 12th century bashy ups. But they do include things like Swiss pikemen and arquebuses, and so they have a general flow of time. Anything medieval, you can play it. So let's have a look. You can see it's taken a bit of a bash over the years because I have played these very often. Now, some things leap out rereading these immediately. Bafflingly, these rules have no guidelines for basing your troops. Most war games will have a guideline for how wide a base you should put miniatures on. That was to sort of bring in a sort of a sense of regulation to, great, my guys are close order infantry, pikemen or something. This is how many guys I can pack into this area, because this is, I will be rolling a number of dice to attack depending on how many guys I've gotten to the area. Because most early rule sets like this, there will be a scale. One figure represents a set number of men, and you will have either individually mounted figures or figures mounted on bases that you can kind of literally break down for change. So you'll have some 4s and some 3s and some 2s and some 1s, because it's easy to move them that way, but you will remove individual models as you take casualties. Well, I mean, I guess Warhammer people are still used to this, but that's very 60s, 70s and 80s rule design right there. But that doesn't mean it doesn't work. It does work. That's why they played it then, and that's why it is still played now. But yeah, no actual set base sizes are in these rules, which I guess kind of means you're going to have to just come up with what seems to be sensible to you. Wackily enough, while they do tell you how many ranks can fire bows, you can fire a second rank of missile-armed troops over the first, they also don't seem to have put in anything for fighting things like pikes and so on in depth. Which again is an odd omission. The bulk of these rules, by the way, they often don't have details. They really talk about what the rules are and leave the combat tables in the back to actually give you the rules and the details. However, so they have two different types of turn sequence. You can either do a I go, you go system, where one side does all of their move, and there are combos that result, and there can be opportunity charges and so forth. If someone is moving in front of you, you can fire opportunistically at you if they move through your, through the zone you can fire weapons into, or you can countercharge if someone is trying to charge you, these sorts of things. But there is alternatively a mixed, what would you call it, sort of an intermingled turn system. This is more difficult, where you write individual orders for each unit which will specify what it does, and then everything moves simultaneously. I've played a lot of games like this. Again, this was a very, very common style for the time. It works, but often these games need an umpire to make sure that everyone is on the up and up, and to speed up play, which again is exceedingly common for the time. In fact, I kind of grew up in that environment, which is why I still refer to dungeon masters and so on in games as umpires, because that's what they were. They were the same people. The people who are helping you run your miniatures game on Thursday were probably a dungeon master on Friday. But so we have those two different styles, whichever works for you. One's going to be faster to play. One is in many ways going to be sort of more realistic and have way more guesswork as to what the other guy's up to, because you've got that moment before you play where you're going to say, all right, I'm going to order these guys to charge, I'm going to send these guys around the side, and I want the spearman in the middle to hold steady, Right, so everything is done in inches, pretty simple numbers, pretty simple movement. Some things are allowed to move and fire, or split their movement and like do a partial move, fire and move. Things like horse archers and so on can do that. You can get multiple shots with infantry if you stand sort of still with them. If you move your archers, you get a shot at the end, but if they stay still, you can fire twice. You can sort of see some of these weird rules coming into Dungeons and Dragons at the time as well. It's odd. A comment on the rules: missile fire is way too deadly. Way too deadly. It's very decisive. What you do is you have troops that are categorized essentially by their protection. They're either kind of unarmored, they got half armor or a shield, or they are fully armored. And you are rolling the number of miniatures that you've got firing. There's a little chart, and it basically has a dice roll. What is it? 1 and 2 and 3 to 6 on a 6-sided dice, and it just gives you the number of casualties that you cause on the enemy. So, for instance, if I fire between 7 and 8 archers at unarmored troops, if I roll a d6 and get a 1 or 2, I will kill off 3 of them, and if I roll a 3 to 6, I will kill off 4 of them. So 8 archers, I would expect them to kill off 4 enemy during a firing round, except if I'm standing still I can fire twice, which means I would expect 2 groups of unarmoured archers over the course of a turn to completely slaughter each other. Well, that was over quickly. Yeah, so that's my little comment on the playability. Yes, it did. I think when we played it, we had to radically change this. We had to put in basically saving throws for troops, because it was just too much damage. It also kind of meant that melee often didn't get there, and yeah, you could just chew pike formations or whatever into pieces. But so that's missile fire. You can also fire artillery, ballistas and rock throwers and so on. Now, that's really weird. Catapult fire, what they did was they do you measure out the range. if you've got a set number of figures of crew, it fires like, what is it, once every turn? No, once every 2 turns. If you've taken casualties to the crew, it will take extra turns to fire because there's less people working it, fair enough. But you essentially pick a midpoint and then you roll for variation left or right from the midpoint. So you may not hit where you're firing, and then when you get there, there is essentially a hit circle around the point of impact, and you just kill everything that's in that circle. Fair enough, it's a boulder. It doesn't care if you're wearing plate armor or if you're running around in a loincloth. Except the guys in a loincloth could probably do a dive and roll, but whatever. If you've got something like bombards, however, that has a bit of a laborious system where you pick an endpoint for your shot, and then there's a rod which is kind of divided into black and white regions, each numbered. You roll to see which part of this rod now starts off from your point of impact, and then you, before you decide that, you call whether you're going to say whites or blacks are hit. If you choose white, any white band on the rod that falls over figures as you extend it from the cannon's barrel, they've been hit by the bounce of the cannonball. If it gets into the black areas, it's bounced over them and they've missed, and it will penetrate far past the point of impact. So you can smush this, like if you've got a pike from phalanx or something, you can smush this deep into a pike phalanx, or if you've got a row of guys too close behind another row of guys, you might do casualties to several. So again, it is exceedingly lethal. So melee is very strange, I have to say. So what you've got, you have to actually dive into the combat tables at the back to actually find those rules. But what it does is it has everything split up into your category. You are light foot, what are you? Light foot, heavy foot, armoured foot, light horse, medium horse, heavy horse. And it gives you what your opponent is. So light foot versus light foot, heavy foot versus heavy foot. But it tells you how many dice you roll per figure. So for instance, where are we? Heavy foot versus light foot, you will roll 1 dice per miniature you have in the combat, and a 5 or 6 on those dice will kill their opponent. Whereas the light foot versus heavy foot, they'd be rolling 1 dice per 2 men, and a 6 kills. So what's that? 1/4 is likely to, no, 1/6 is likely to score a hit. So this is how this is done. You have to look up this little matrix to tell you. So if I have 20 heavy foot fighting those light foot, I will be rolling 20. As I said, there was nowhere that really said about fighting in depth for spears. You would think that they would do something like saying long spears fight in 2 ranks, and I don't know, pike can fight in 4. And that's what I remember from playing these rules back in the 70s, and when we played them again recently, we instigated that as a house rule, but it isn't actually officially in here. There is a morale table, essentially, and it's very complex, I have to say. You have to multiply some different factors of how many casualties you've taken versus how many you had in the unit, etc., and make a roll. And there's a little chart that will tell you whether you have had to withdraw, take off, freeze in place, etc. Yeah, where are we? Yeah, so you're multiplying the casualty factor by what you are. Are you peasants? Are you light foot? Are you armoured foot? There's bonuses. They keep coming back to bonuses if you're Swiss or Landsknecht, because these guys were fairly renowned for discipline, you know, at their time. And then if there is a sizable difference between the results of both sides, you look for results. So, and they could be the melee continues, or one of you moves back in good order, or one of you breaks and flees, etc. There are also rules in here for if your army is taking casualties. You have to do morale rolls to see if the whole army packs it in. So peasant armies are quite likely to flood. They've got some strange little optional rules for mercenaries, where each turn there's a chance that the mercenaries might basically stand still and strike for more money. I'm glad it's optional, because we would never use that, because things like Swiss mercenaries or Landsknecht mercenaries or your Brabant spearsmen and so on are renowned for their efficiency in battle. That's why we're paying money for them. So yeah, a little thing done to make a factor of uncertainty in a game, which you could do, but for historical realism I wouldn't. So you get an array of sort of lists of different armies and what they would be like. So we're going to say a Crusader army might look like this. We're going to say a Saracen army might be like this. You know, maybe 20 or 30% of this army we're going to count as armoured cavalry. These guys, maybe 10 or 20% of them are going to be light cavalry, but they're horse archers, so they get to use the horse archer rule. So it gives you guidelines for creating armies within this context. There are man-to-man rules, and this is where Dungeons and Dragons comes from. They have a set of rules for if you're swapping down to a skirmish scale, man-to-man combat. So there are actually multiple sets of rules in this tiny little book. The man-to-man rules, they have initiative rules. Everything is going to be used on D6s again. There's a morale table. And again, the morale table, you have to go finding it in the back. The man-to-man melee table. And this gives you scores on 2d6 that you need to land a target, a hit on a target. So depending on the weapon you've got. So you look down and it will be something, or what have we got? I'm using a battle axe and I'm going to attack someone that is wearing chainmail and a shield, and it will say 7. Good, 7 or higher, and I score a hit. Where D&D came from was when someone said, what if we had characters that got better at this stuff? It's like, if I'm the mightiest swordsman in the land, what, someone rolls a 7 and I drop dead? So you're going to get this idea of, well, maybe we say it will take multiple hits to bring you down, because, you know, that just makes you tougher and harder to get rid of. And maybe you get multiple blows during a turn if you get quite butch. Maybe you fight as... And in the context of the wider game, if a hero figure is on the board, it counts as maybe 2 or 3 or 4 figures when it fights. When you look at original D&D, it expresses in there how many figures a character counts as on a tabletop for a chainmail battle. That weird thing that is, it still keeps appearing in D&D today, that when you get to a certain level, suddenly you'll get a stronghold and you'll get these followers turn up. I'll get 16, I'll get, 3d6 heavy cavalry and 200 peasants armed with, I don't know, kazoos and wet towels. That's this coming back again. That's your chainmail army that they're saying. Okay, my guy's now moving away from being an individual adventurer. Now you're going to be a general, and we're going to do a campaign of this. Is actually what that is. And it will tell you in those original rules how many men your character counts as in the wider combat, and what bonuses you get if you're going on the man-to-man melee scale. Individual fire with missile is in here again. You look at the class of armor worn, and it gives you a dice roll to hit. But you also get a jousting table. There's a jousting matrix if you want to do tournaments and jousts. I rather like that. So what you do is you pick an aiming point, and then you pick basically a defensive posture, what you're going to do, and you both do that secretly, and then, haha, you reveal them. And or you can roll them randomly. But essentially, that cross-indexing gives you a result. So for instance, if I aim at, if I went for Vespale, which is the lower center of the shield, FP, and my guy's target's defense has been to lean left. So Vespale versus lean left gives me a result of B, and you have a look, break lance. So yeah, you kind of, so you're making secret choices and cross them off. This was borrowed for the making of first edition Chivalry and Sorcery as well, and has provided endless fun. But now also for the D&D players out here, we get to another interesting bit, the fantasy reference table, because there's a whole section in here, the fantasy supplement, which appeared, I don't believe it was in first edition. This is what the consultation with people like Ernie and so on is, where someone essentially said, hey, what if we play Lord of the Rings? What are orcs? What are elves? How do they go? So what this does is, it gives you a series of rundowns on what different fantasy things would be expressed as in these rules. So it'll say something like, where are we, dwarves, diddly-dee. It says stuff that again you see in D&D, pretty much to this day. Okay, they're going to be armoured infantry or perhaps heavy infantry. Giants have a hard time fighting these guys because they're kind of small, so they find them a little bit harder to grab. So these guys get a bonus when they are fighting giants, and etc. Goblins and kobolds, it'll say this is their movement rating, and what else to say? Yeah, hobgoblins and so on are slightly bigger ones. Fighters armoured foot, but defenders heavy foot. These guys movers light foot, but defenders heavy foot. They'll give them some variance. So we got elves and hobbits and sprites because the Tolkien estate hadn't quite gotten onto them yet. Heroes, as I said, gives you their manpower and so forth. Superheroes, which are even more super than a hero, I guess. A hero is Aragorn, a superhero is probably, Elric. Wizards and how they work and what their spells are, the kind of artillerymen, basically. What else have we got? Yeah, they can fire lightning bolts and fireballs and so forth. Again, there's our basic spells from Dungeons and Dragons appearing, but also we have a list of spells that can be cast on the battlefield with names we will all remember: Phantasmal Force, Darkness, Detection, Concealment and Wizard Light, and Conjuring Elementals, Haste Spells, Slowness and Levitate, Protection from Evil, Polymorphs and Hallucinatory Terrain and Cloud Kills and all sorts of things. So it's all in there. There is a slightly complex set of tables to look for the values and complexities of spells, and you essentially pick competence of wizards, and it gives you, which a spell they can use. It's got all sorts of individual monsters in here. It's got lycanthropes, it's got balrogs, and of course it's got dragons and rocks and all kinds of other cool things which you could start to get as figures. Thank you, minifigs, I will love you forever. And that's in fact how I started playing this game. The minifigs, Lord of the Rings, orcs and so on, which had the best wargs in the universe with big long pointy snouts. They're still available from Helion Books. So, fancy wargaming, which brings in individual characters, and Dungeons and Dragons springs from this as we start looking on people going on quests and so on to gain experience so that those characters become more powerful in the context of these rules. Eventually, miniatures, wargaming campaigns and so on are divorced away from role-playing and it becomes its own thing. So, but this has magical weapons, it's got all these things that you might remember. Beautifully enough in the back, here's our other fantasy releases. Other fantasy releases by TSR. What have they got in 75? Dungeons and Dragons. Chainmail. Ooh, okay. Emperor of the Battle Throne. Star Probe. Star Empires. So This is a foundation game for role-playing games. As a miniatures game, how playable is it? Look, I have played this often. We had to house rule the living crap out of it. Like I said, the lack of guidelines on basing and the lack of guidelines on fighting in depth, over massively efficient missiles and so forth, proved to be a problem. So we found we needed to tweak it. But that is what rule sets, particularly things like this, which were sort of like quite simple, adaptable rules, that's what they were designed to be in the 70s. The rules were not written in stone. And I think if I open this, you will probably find pretty damn quickly it will tell you it's the player that's given the scope of choice and the range of imagination to modify these rules as they want. Yeah, so they're always telling you this is a guideline and embrace whatever changes you want to make your game. So it is playable, it is fun in its strange little way. The missile fire, yeah, you're counting up how many troops firing and you're rolling a handful of dice, which is always fun. But you have guaranteed casualties. You're not like rolling 15 dice and looking for 4s and 5s and 6s. You'll roll 4 or 5 dice and... you'll roll a dice for missile fire, and on a 1 or 2, it'll do this. On a 4, 5, 6, it'll do that. Melee combat, you're going to look at your chart. How many dice do my guys roll? I've got 20 guys fighting. They're rolling 1 dice each, but they're hitting on 5s or 6s. Okay, here goes my fist full of dice. I got 20 dice rolling. So more chaotic. A slightly slow method then of figuring out post melee battle morale, where you have to kind of look at the ratio of figures that you've lost and then multiply that by a factor depending on what you are, be you peasants or armoured infantry or cavalry or whatever, and then looking at a chart to see what the result is when you compare that with what the other guy has, etc. So a slightly slow morale system, but other stuff is pretty simple, like movement and turn sequencing and the integration of fancy elements. Using pretty simple tools could put some nice variance into things. So still playable today, but as I said, you will have to house rule it because there are some strange things in it. You go through all this and that all seems fine, and then you'll suddenly find a note here in the combat tables which say if you've got longer melee weapons than the other guy, he can't hit you. What? You put that in one line in the back of this? So if I've got pikes, yeah, and you don't, yeah, I am inviolate. Unless you have missile weapons. These guys with swords and axes and whatever, and polearms, will just never be able to fight me, because mine are longer. You will want to change rules like that. No ifs or buts. You might want to put in that the longer weapon rolls its damage first. That is fair and will give you a result. But yeah, just some little surprises there. If you've got a rules lawyer combing through this, you can find some weird stuff. Anyway, I think it's worth if you can find Chainmail, you can download copies from drive-through. It's worth having around as a document to show if you're a role-playing game designer or a role-playing game enthusiast. This is nice because it's where our hobby comes from. This, and then these guys went and heard about early role-playing games being played at clubs nearby, Braunstein, and then they sat down and cooked up D&D. So this is historically a nice thing to have around. It's actually quite a cute little basis in many ways for skirmish style campaigns or kind of small battle games that might grow up around characters in a Dungeons and Dragons style game. If you are, leading revolts against evil overlords, if you are making Robin Hood style bandits who are fighting against the dreaded sheriff, if you are out there trying to really fight those strange, sinister followers of the the Dark Wizard Schnoop, somewhere out there in the wilderness, then this does give you a framework for playing these, particularly if you're using older versions of Dungeons and Dragons, Zero Edition and BX and so on. It keeps things sort of in the same framework. Beyond that, I would use swords and spells. If you are getting into the whole Zero Ed playing and you've added things like Greyhawk and so on in, swords and spells, which was the successor to this, the fantasy successor to Chainmail, and that does fill all the holes. That does give you basing, that does give you depths of units, it does give you simpler morale rules, it takes all the lessons learned from early D&D to basically allow you to play D&D en masse. So do take a look at Swords and Spells as well. I have previously done a review of this. Swords and Spells is an excellent game. It is D&D, early D&D writ large. Fantastic. You can lead your orc tribe to victory. Anyway, playable, good game. We've enjoyed it over many decades of play. This set of rules, this one here, is still in play after all these years. God, 1975. Oh God, Jesus. Yeah, all right. Slightly old. Here I am in 2025, showing you the book I bought in 1975. Anyway, hope I can meet you all around a games table sometime. For those of you who are in minority groups, particularly in the USA and the UK, take enormous care of your personal safety. Literally watch your corners, but never let anyone interfere with you living openly and you living magnificently. Take no crap from anyone. Anyway, hopefully we meet around a games table someday, my friends. Much love to you all.